What?
All righty. I want to welcome everybody to our October meeting of the Robert Lunz Group. I'm Pat Lugg, the membership chair and the vice chair. And we have over 1,400 members from Charleston, Berkeley, Dorchester, and Colleton counties. And our mission is to explore, enjoy, and protect the planet.
Oh, sorry. Next slide.
Our leadership includes Christine Von Kolnitz as chair, Yvonne Michelle as treasurer, our outings chair and webmaster is Star Hazard, Laura Moses does publicity, Alec Cooley is our newsletter editor, Julia Hall is our state ExCom representative and our recording secretary, Marcus Sizemore is beach and river sweep organizer, which unfortunately we were not able to do this year, and Nina Fair rounds out our executive committee. Now we currently have 2 vacancies on our ExCom. One is conservation chair and the other is political chair. If you think you would be interested in either of these, please reach out to one of us, come join us, get involved. We would love to have you.
All right, and Star Hazard will give us an outings report.
So the in respect to the COVID crisis, the Sierra Club has demanded that we stop giving in-person outings. So what we've done instead is to come up with a variable list of things that you might want to go out and go do yourself. Tonight the moon is full, and should you happen to be free and want to go out someplace where it's dark, I'd suggest you go out to the Gadsdenville Public Boat Landing. It's not too far from downtown Charleston, up on Highway 17, and there's it's one of the official CCPRC boat landings. And if you go out there, you can park adjacent to you actually drive on a little causeway out into the marsh, and it's a great place for looking at the full moon rise tonight and the bright moon and stars most any night when it's clear. Another thing that you might do is go again out Highway 17 to go to the Seawee Shell Mound. It's a short little walk once you get there, not far north on, the instructions are right there. It's a nice sort of cool weather, sort of self-guided walk. It should be a fun sort of thing to do. If you're in Mount Pleasant, I would encourage you to try out the Patriots Point Nature Trail. And just at the end of that, if you cross the road, you can go on the Hog Island Trail and go out on the observation deck there and look out upon the harbor. Patriots Point Trail has a number of little observation decks which you can crawl up and you're sort of in the tree canopy. It's a great time to go out, in fact, because the fall warblers are moving south from up north, and they're going down to their winter vacations. There'll be probably plenty of them to be seen in there. And of course, getting out where you can look onto the harbor on the Hog Island Trail is a lovely place. These are all basically flat places. So there's no elevation to wear you out. Get out there and enjoy on your own. The club will start opening back up for in-person outings probably at the end of the first quarter in 2021. Until then, we'll be having things for you to do in a sort of a self-directed way. So good luck. Get out there.
All righty. Sierra Club National is endorsing Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. On the state level, we're endorsing Jamie Harrison for U.S. Senate, Joe Cunningham for House of Representatives 1st District, James Clyburn, House of Representatives 6th District. On a more local level, we are endorsing Ed Sutton for House District 114, Debbie Bryant for Senate District 44. Daniel Brownstein, House District 112, and Spencer Wetmore for House District 115. Well, tonight we want to welcome author, Scott Huler. It's a pleasure to have him doing our program tonight. He'll be talking about his book, A Delicious Country. But before we get into tonight's program, I want you to go ahead and mark your calendars for November 5th. We're going to have Jen Tyrell with Audubon, South Carolina, and she's going to be talking to us about the Raptors of South Carolina. So again, I want to thank you for coming and joining with us tonight, and I hope you will be back and join us in November.
And I'm Laura Moses. I'd like to introduce our speaker tonight. Scott Huler is the author of 7 books of nonfiction, including A Delicious Country. He has written on everything from the death penalty to bikini waxing, from NASCAR racing to the stealth bomber, for newspapers such as the New York Times, the Washington Post, and Philadelphia Inquirer, and Los Angeles Times, and magazines including Backpacker, Fortune, and ESPN. His award-winning radio work has been heard on All Things Considered and Day to Day on NPR, and on Marketplace and Splendid Table. He's been a staff writer for the Philadelphia Daily News and the Raleigh News and Observer, and a staff reporter and producer for Nashville Public Radio. He was the founding and managing editor of the Nashville City Paper. Scott Huler has taught at Berry College and the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. His books have been translated into 5 languages. He currently works as the senior writer at Duke Magazine and lives in Raleigh, North Carolina. Welcome, Scott, and thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me. It is really nice to be here and to see you. Please be aware that because you're all on mute, I can't hear you. So when I drop some delightful bon mot, I will not be able to hear your raucous laughter. So if I look a little awkward, please excuse me. That was a very nice introduction. I love that introduction. It says I've written on everything from the death penalty to bikini waxing. I like to say I'm against one and believe the other is appropriate only under very specific circumstances. I will let you figure out which is which. What I'm going to do is share with you a PowerPoint because I have a PowerPoint because of course I have a PowerPoint. PowerPoint is how we live. It's how we used to live before Zoom. Now we have both. So the first thing I'm going to do is share my screen, and then I'm going to start this PowerPoint. I will talk, I'm going to kind of race through the PowerPoint because I don't know how effective it will be here. And also because frankly, I've heard it before. I'm very interesting. I could listen to me all day long, but I have heard it all before. It's much more interesting to me to talk with you, answer questions. I have things to show you. I would love to answer any questions that you have. If you have questions, please throw them in the chat, and all the Sierra Club Executive Committee will read through them. If there's something that they need to stop me with, they'll shout it out. If not, we'll just go through them at the end. But then hopefully at the end, we can open up and we can actually talk to each other. And when I say by the end, I hope I can race through this in 20 or 25 minutes because as I say, it's interesting, but I'm bored with it. And I think we can all agree that the important thing is here for me to be interested. Okay, I'm trusting you can all see that. This is an actual PowerPoint presentation. Usually I don't do PowerPoints. I hold a room with my fascinating personal magnetism, but to talk about a long book, I thought I would do a PowerPoint. I have delivered it many times. I hope you enjoy it, and I hope we get through it quickly because then we can talk. So thing 1, this is my 7th book of nonfiction, depending on how you count, it could be more. I've written a lot of books. Enough, you could say that I have developed the theme. If you look at any of my books, no matter what I have written about, the theme is this: pay attention. Be alert, understand what you can of the world around you. The universe is out there whispering its secrets into our ears, and we're too busy on our phones to pay any attention. I advocate strongly, put down the phone, be alive to what's happening around you, ask questions, learn. I share that approach with John Lawson, a 17th and 18th century observer of what was around him. And when I stumbled on Lawson, I'll explain how. He took over my life for about a decade. And the first thing that you will want to know is, well, okay, who's John Lawson? What do we know about John Lawson? There are a lot of questions there. And the one thing, though, there's one thing that everybody, basically, all the researchers can agree about John Lawson. He's basically some guy. Literally, before he shows up in Carolina in 1700, we know almost nothing about this guy. He shows up in Carolina in 1700 and writes a very important book. He took a long walk through the Carolinas. They were then, of course, a single colony. His book is considered one of the first, if not possibly the first book, to refer to North Carolina as a separate entity. Lawson ended up the Surveyor General of North Carolina. He founded Bath and New Bern, which were the two first cities in, two first actually founded cities in North Carolina. He did botanical collecting. He's really an interesting character. I have heard him, above all, referred to as a great noticer. Has anybody heard that phrase before? I guess if you have, I just won't know it because you have no way of telling me that. But it's a phrase that you hear now and then. It turns out to come from Dr. Dolittle. Polynesia the parrot asks one of the, there's somebody needs to be muted. Okay, great, good. Polynesia asks of the narrator, Tommy Stubbins, they figured out that he hasn't had much schooling and he's probably not going to be good for much. And Polynesia says, well, are you a good noticer? You know, can you pay attention to things? She says, if you go out in your yard today and you see a couple birds and you go out tomorrow and you see a couple birds, will you know whether they're the same birds? I think that's a wonderful question that she asks him. And it's a great question we should ask ourselves. Where am I? What am I seeing? What am I noticing? Well, Lawson was a great noticer. And in how did I meet Lawson? In Hollywood parlance, Lawson and I met cute. I was working on another book. In this case, I was doing my noticing about infrastructure. I got interested in, you know, the electricity that we have in our house, and you turn on a faucet and water comes out all day, every day. Well, how does that happen? How does that work? I got interested in all these different things. And I wanted to trace the water pipes, the sewer pipes, the electrical grid, the streets. Somebody paves them. How wide is a road? Whose idea was that? Since when? How do they do that? I got interested in all of that stuff. And one thing led back and back and back and back to, I had to start with the land, because I used my own house. That that picture there is basically based on my house right here in Raleigh. And since my house was going to be the center of this book, to humanize it, I thought, well, I should understand my piece of land and where it came from and what it looked like before, when the Native Americans lived on it, before Europeans showed up to improve it with carports and forsythia bushes and 5-story stick-built condos. So I thought, here's what I'm going to do. I am going to trace backwards. I'm going to, in the deed records, and I'm going to make my way back to the first person who owned this property. Well, within like 2 sales, I fell into a nest of developers selling it back and forth to one another. I wanted to stick a knife in my eye. That was crazy pants. I was like, no, thank you. I'm not doing that. So I thought, oh, I've got an idea. I will start from the Lord's Proprietors. And you're all familiar with the Lord's Proprietors, right? The 8 rich white, work with me here. We're going to try to imagine a time when a bunch of rich white men owned everything. I know that's a stretch. It's difficult to wrap your mind around, but try to do it. The 8 Lord's Proprietors who owned the entire Carolina colony. I thought, well, I'll look at the original land grants and I'll work. Yeah, sure, I will. Of course, that was just as crazy. I was going to have to make like a lifetime project of that. So I did what researchers do when you come up with a problem that's too thorny for you to solve. I just left it out. I just left it out of that book. But while I was doing my research, I came across this very interesting guy. His name was John Lawson. And what happened was that in 1700, he shows up in Charlestown, as they called it in those days. And he takes this big, long walk all through the Carolinas, and he writes a book about it that is incredibly important. It's full of interesting observations. Once he's here, he's no longer just some guy. He's an astonishing character, and he does all these things. He turns out to be an incredibly important guy. He makes scientific contributions. He sends botanical specimens back to what were called virtuosi in the day. They were collectors. This was the very beginning of museum culture, the dawn of the scientific revolution. Lawson's book is referred to by Linnaeus. Lawson's book is referred to by Catesby and Audubon. Lawson is listed as the source of as the first source of some words by the Oxford English Dictionary. Lawson turns out to be an amazing kind of character. His specimens that he sent back in boxes back to England to a guy named James Petiver, who was an apothecary, which was a big deal in those days. Kind of meant scientist and physician and pharmacist and all kinds of things. Hans Sloane bought Petiver's collection, and Sloane's collection, when Sloane died, formed what we know of as the British Museum. So Lawson's botanical specimens are in the original collection of the British Museum. And if you go back to the Natural History Museum and you talk your way into the back room, which I did, I'm a journalist, that's my only skill, is talking my way into places where I shouldn't be, you can actually see Lawson's specimens. These are Lawson's actual specimens. I touched them. It was pretty awesome. Anyhow, beyond that, there are a million biographical sketches of Lawson. Most of them don't agree on on anything about Lawson. They think he came from here. They think he came from there. We know that he showed up in Charleston. He took a long walk, and he wanted to get the word out. He wanted to tell the story of that, which he did. He wrote The New Voyage to Carolina, which in about the first decade of the 18th century, A New Voyage to Blank was a standard title. And so he wrote this incredible book. Now, the bio sketch that I believe the most was the most recent one, written by a guy named Holloman. It's in the North Carolina Encyclopedia of Biography. And he believes that Lawson attended Gresham College in London, which sounds right because he was a writer, right? He was literate. That wasn't so many people in 1700. And he wrote a book. That was an amazing thing. And he came from, when he was at Gresham College, a new thing was happening there. The Royal Society was meeting. The Royal Society, as we all know, was really the world's first scientific society, founded in the 1660s, just before the Carolina colony in England, of course. And Lawson was looking for a book to write. He wanted to get the attention of these scientists. I mean, he watched Newton walk around at Gresham College. He watched, Hooke walk around. I like to think of Lawson looking at these original giant scientists like Mark Twain looking at steamboat pilots, or people of my generation looking at astronauts. I think Lawson was like, that's what I want. I'll have some of that. Let me in on that. I want to get to be part of that. So he was looking for something to do. He tells us in his book that he was considering going to the Grand Jubilee in Rome, which was a big, basically kind of a state fair that the Pope threw every 25 years. Why? Because what else did people have to do? It gave people a chance to get out of town, go somewhere and see something interesting, and make some money for the Pope and the people who hung out with him. So he was going to go do that. And Lawson, in his book, tells us the story that he was hanging around London. making his plans, and somebody came up to him. I like to think it was kind of like the fox in Pinocchio, and puts his arm around Lawson's shoulder and said, well, you could go to Rome if you want, but isn't Rome kind of 17th century? You know, the 18th century is all happening over here in Carolina. You should go to Carolina. As it happens, I have a boat going to Carolina right now. Why don't you come along with us? Well, Lawson does. Lawson gets on that boat. He doesn't tell us whether he paid for passage or whether he was just swept up in the excitement and got free passage across the Atlantic. In any case, shows up, goes across the Atlantic, he stops in New York, makes his way down to Charleston, and then for reasons we still don't know, takes his big walk. There's so much missing about our understanding of Lawson that historian Francis Latham Harris said, Lawson appears to have flashed like a meteor across our ken, leaving behind him only this illuminating record of his presence and the tragic memory of his death. His death turns out to be very important. Lawson took his famous walk in 1700. He did all that other cool stuff. He founded Bath, he founded New Bern. He was a fair general. He helped survey the Virginia border, or actually he helped people fail to survey the Virginia border, which is another story. He sent his stuff to Pettifer. And at the end of it, he got killed for his troubles. People believe he was killed by the Tuscarora taking little pieces of pine, what we all call fat lighter of pine, and poking him through like a pin cushion with that, and lighting those on fire and making him dance while he burned to death like a candle. This all happened in 1711. We're not really sure that that's exactly how he died. We do know that he was captured by the Tuscarora, along with a fellow named von Graffenried, who was the other founder of New Bern with Lawson. And von Graffenried lived to tell the tale. Lawson did not, so we have only von Graffenried's story. And von Graffenried did not see Lawson die, but he knows he never saw Lawson again. Where some people think they cut his throat when they were going through, when they had taken them prisoner, they went through Lawson's clothing and they found his straight razor, which I try to imagine that moment when Lawson is sitting there tied up by the Indians, which you can see in this picture, and they're going through his clothes and they find his straight razor, and he's got to be thinking, man, I wish I'd have left that in my bag. You know, that's not a good feeling. Some people think they hung him. Some people think they, set him on fire. The historians prefer the setting on fire story because in his book, Lawson describes that method of execution, and historians love irony, so they think that that's what happened. At any rate, the one thing we know for sure, for reasons that we don't know exactly why, Lawson took this really long walk. And it was a long walk. He started in Charleston, where y'all are, and he made his way up the coast for about 40 miles to the mouth of the Santee. Elizabeth Anderegg, who is with us today, can tell you that she helped me do that exact thing. Then he got out of his canoe. People think that they probably started paddling upstream and very quickly thought, no, thank you. The Santee at that point, before the Army Corps of Engineers fixed it, was an enormously important, powerful river, and making your way up that river was not an easy job. So they got out and they walked along Indian paths all the way up, all the way through the both Carolinas, and ended up about 2 months later at what North Carolinians now call Little Washington, what the Tuscarora probably called in those days, the place where that British guy lives with his daughter. And he ended up there, and he liked it so much that he took up with that daughter, and she became his common law wife. But at any rate, he canoed, he hiked, he walked among the original Huguenots, settlers from France that preceded the English. He went among the Siwi, the Santee, the Wateree, the Sugary, the Congaree, the Waxhaw, the Catawba, the Eno, the Occaneechi, the Saponi, and the Tuscarora, and telling us Lawson at some points is by far our best source of understanding about those tribes, those original peoples. He tells us about their dancing. He tells us about their eating. He tells us about their religious practices, their funeral custom. Above all, he is thorough. He is respectful. He is loving towards those people. He clearly thinks the world of them. He makes this, the book that we have that Lawson wrote is still referred to today by historians, by biologists, by botanists, and Lawson, above all, told us stories about a world on edge. That is, Lawson understood that he was not seeing Native Americans in their flower. He was not seeing Native American culture. He was seeing the ragged end of something that had been here a century before. Lawson says this in his book, "The smallpox and rum have made such a destruction amongst them that on good grounds I do believe there is not the sixth savage living within 200 miles of all our settlements as there were 50 years ago. There's not one in 6 left. These poor creatures have so many enemies to destroy them that it's a wonder one of them is left alive near us." That's interesting. That's amazing. Lawson is really looking at, he is seeing a world in a way that most of his fellow explorers are not. As you know, this is the time when there were two sort of competing ways of looking at North America from the European perspective. One was, hey, you guys, a continent, and it's free, let's go settle it. And the other one was, hey, you guys, a continent, let's kill everyone on it and then settle it. Those were really the two ways of looking at this. Now, Lawson, in fact, sees something very different. Lawson says, here, I'd like you all to read this, but I'm going to read it to you. They are really better to us than we are to them. They always give us victuals at their quarters and take care we are armed against hunger and thirst. We do not so by them, generally speaking, but let them walk by our doors hungry and do not often relieve them. We look upon them with scorn and disdain and think them little better than beasts in human shape. Though if well examined, we shall find that for all our religion and education, we possess more moral deformities and evils than the savages do or are acquainted with. Who was talking like that in 1700? Only Lawson. He was utterly unique among his group, among his cohort of explorers. So that's an amazing character. He understood that he was seeing the end of something. And as I started to research this book, I found out things that stunned me. For example, Indian slavery. Now you guys live in Charleston, so you're all very familiar with Charleston, the great slave port of Charleston, where this enormous amount of African slaves, African captives, were brought into horrifying servitude. Who knew that for its first 50 years, Charleston shipped more Native American bodies to the islands than it shipped Africans to North America? I did not even know Indian slavery was a thing when I started researching this book. I was stunned. More Indians shipped to the islands to live a brief and horrible life in the sun, cutting sugarcane until they died, than they shipped Africans into Charleston before about 1720. Astonishing things. So Lawson was observing something that to this day we are not doing a good job of observing. Anyway, he understood. He talks about going through empty Indian villages and seeing, that there's just nobody left. he's paying attention. He is seeing what he sees rather than what he expects to see. And so that's an amazing thing. And yes, we were talking about A Big Long Walk. And I stumbled on Lawson, finished that other book I was talking about. And I got interested. I wanted to know when I was doing that book, well, okay, maybe Lawson's description, part of his book is a straightforward journal of that trip. And I thought, well, maybe that journal where he walks through near where I live, because he walked right through part of what is Shirley, now Raleigh. And I thought, well, I can take his description of that area and I can use it as my description of what I was originally looking for, was what did Raleigh look like before we got here. Well, so I went looking for the book of where did someone go and take Lawson's observations and spike them into modern places. Where's the book that does that? It turns out that book doesn't exist. May I tell you that in the life of a writer, there are few better moments than discovering that a book you very much need does not exist, because then you have the job of writing that book. So I undertook that. But there's a good question, which is, you can see that would be fun, right? To retrace Lawson's journey. It was about between 500 and 600 miles. I'd get to walk all through the countryside. I'd get to go camping. I'd get to talk to people. You can see why that would be interesting for me. Why would it be interesting for someone else? Why would some publisher say, here, Huler, here's a big bag of money, go out and do this book, and then people will line up in bookstores to buy everything you have to say about it? Why on earth would that be important? Why would that be worth doing? Well, here's one reason. Anybody here familiar with Grinnell's Transect of Yosemite? Well, I'm sure you are, either are or aren't. One of those is the case. I will tell you briefly about it. Joseph Grinnell, walked through various parts of California in 1910 to take note of what was there. And if you read this value will not, however, be realized until the lapse of many years, possibly a century, assuming that our material is safely preserved. That is, by Grinnell leading these expeditions through different parts of California, they could say, what lives here? Who lives here? What eats what? What grows where? What grows when? What time do the seasons change? You know, when is it swampy and when is it dry? All kinds of questions that are very, very important if you want to understand the place that you are living. Grinnell gathered a data set, and now people are retracing those data sets. So I thought, you know, what Lawson did, in essence, was collect a data set. And I will collect a second data set. I will walk through and I will share my observations of what I see. I will try to do what Lawson did. I will see what I see rather than what I expect to see. And we will compare. And this is, in fact, something people are doing a lot. For example, people are using Thoreau's journals to compare when plants flowered in, you know, the 1840s, was that right? Yeah, the 1840s, and now, and they found that the dates have changed by about 13 days, which if you weren't terrified by climate change, that ought to terrify you. That in less than 200 years, we have changed 2 weeks in a 13-week season. That's pretty upsetting. We do it with Aldo Leopold's wonderful Sand County Almanac as well. So I thought, all right, then I can do that. I can sort of justify my my big trip, which was going to put everybody who knows me out in significant ways. But I don't want to oversell. This was a cool thing to do, and Lawson wasn't retracing. Lawson was just noticing. And I wanted to make sure that I did not try to slavishly find every footprint of Lawson and say, I am exactly where Lawson was, but instead walked through the countryside and said, who lives here now? Who used to live here? What grows here? What eats what? When does it flower? What is happening and when? And things like that. So I tried to do what Lawson did rather than just focus exclusively on Lawson's path. And in fact, late in the trip, I now believe I was off by about a mile. I was about a mile south of where I wanted to be. Who cares? Who could possibly care? What's the difference? Same territory, same general area. I was walking through and seeing what the people were doing. So I was doing my job. So I met an amazing group of people. I met descendants of the original Huguenots that Lawson talked to. I met descendants of the original Santee tribes that that Lawson talked to. I met descendants of the Catawbas. I met descendants of the Enos. I met a descendant, in fact, of Von Graffenried. You know, just astonishing things. Once you start turning over rocks, this kind of stuff happens. This is what happens. I walked through the swamps where Lawson describes them. When Lawson said, okay, today we started to find Spanish moss again, which we hadn't seen for a month and a half since we left the swampy area of South Carolina. That exact day when I was walking, that's where I came across Spanish moss again. Amazing stuff like that. It was kind of thrilling. The question, of course, is Lawson noticed, what did I notice? What did I see? And, you know, warning vacation slides coming up. So the first thing was Elizabeth Wright, Spartina alterniflora, the most amazing grass on the planet that sits and creates the mud beneath its own feet. It's this vitally important thing that you guys in South Carolina have done such a fabulous job of protecting your shoreline, either because you're forward-thinking people or because the same bunch of rich people have owned it for 400 years. Either way, it's good news. We have this beautiful Spartina. One of the things I learned here very quickly, Elizabeth can tell you this is true, is that Lawson did not paddle his own canoe. Here's how I know this. He jumped in a 10-person canoe, you know, a cypress bark dugout canoe with 6 Indian guides, one of whom was a woman, 4 Indian guides, one of whom was a woman, and 6 Europeans, including him and his dog, and all their supplies. They jumped in that and they paddled off, and he never paddled his canoe. Why do I know this? Because Lawson complained about everything. He complained when he was wet. He complained when he was tired. He complained when he was hot. He complained when he was hungry. He complained when the mosquitoes were there. He complained when the food wasn't to his liking. He complained and complained and complained and complained. It was wonderful. I was like, oh, I would love to travel with this guy, and we would complain about everything together. It would be so much fun. But he never complained about paddling that canoe. And I can tell you, by the end of my first day paddling up the Intracoastal Waterway, all I cared about was 2 things. Which way is the wind blowing and which way is the tide running? That's all I cared about, because I was trying to horse this enormous overburdened canoe up the waterway with a kayak paddle. And if we had like a little headwind, I was cooked. One of my guides said, his name was Ed Deal, he said, you're a sailboat and you're the sail, because as a canoe, I'm sitting right up there. And he's in a little kayak, and he would, yeah, it's kind of headwind. Let me go across the waterway and see if it's any softer over there. And he'd go, and he'd be right across the waterway. And then he'd go, he'd come right back and say, yeah, maybe let's cross. And meanwhile, I would take 20 minutes to get like 100 yards. And then I would stop and take a drink of water, and I would get pushed back 90 yards, you know. So it was crazy. So I'm here to tell you, Lawson never paddled a stinky canoe. I think of him being like Eustace Tilley, that guy in the front of the New Yorker, looking at the butterfly with his little eyepiece. He was just sitting there taking notes while everybody else paddled. So what else? Here's Bull's Island. You're all familiar with Bull's Island. from my perspective, Bulls Island decided that the Jurassic was working just great and they stuck with it. It looks like a Triceratops could come trundling out of there. Here's one of the people, Lawson. I want you to understand this. Lawson's trip, do not think Lewis and Clark. Think more like road trip. It was much more National Lampoon than Lewis and Clark. He had an Indian guide every step of the way. He was on established Indian trails every step of the way. He was going places that not too many Europeans had gone, but he wasn't discovering territory. He was just seeing what was out there. So I tried to do the same and have guides as much as I could. Of course, we used every map that we could. This is a woman named Katie, who was an ecologist who I became friends with and is a friend to this day. Here you see us, we're in a church basement. We slept in church basements on this trip. I slept at campsites. I slept in church pews. I slept on people's porches. A special night, I did something that I thought was really incredible. I started in the morning and I walked until I got tired and I looked for a likely place and I put down my tent and I climbed in my tent and I went to sleep. I didn't care whose land it was. I didn't pay any attention. I made sure I wasn't in anybody's backyard and that I couldn't be seen from the street. I got up the next morning, I folded up my tent and off I went. I felt like this was, I was walking along the earth on God's planet and I just laid my body down and I got up the next morning. And one day, I was talking to someone who I wanted to go through her property because one of my great guides believed that Lawson had walked across it. And I reached out to her and she was like, well, what are you doing and where and how, and I told her all about Lawson. We got there and she said, well, so, okay, well, like, where do you sleep? And so I told her what I've just told you, including that business about how I just lay down one night, wherever I happen to be. And she was like, oh, well, then we're done. You're not walking on my property. If that's how you feel about private property, you are not welcome on mine. And I was like, oh, right, because your ancestors stole it fair and square from the Indians and developed it fair and square with slaves. Now my walking across it offends you. That's what I was out here to do, was to interact with people, find out what's the lay of the land, what's going on. So, and again, it's not just the natural world. Is there anything in this world that is more just deeply comforting on a gut level than somebody's house where laundry is out there on the line? I love walking by something like that. And in fact, later on, I took another picture. I was sharing this stuff on social media, and a friend of mine who's an artist painted a picture based on an image that I shared on Instagram. I'm not sure it gets much better than that if you're a journalist. Okay, Cypress tupelo swamps, right? What could be better? This is the coolest thing. And this is like right out of Central Casting. You're waiting for the creature from the Black Lagoon to come out of that swamp. But then again, natural things followed by, I was like, I called home. I was like, can I have it? Can I keep it? No! My wife was like, no, we got enough crap in our yard. You just leave the crap there. As I said, I was sharing things on social media. The law says if you're sharing things on social media, you have to share pictures of the food you eat. So here's me and Lawson having barbecue one day. You could call my trip the John Lawson guide to the diners of the Southeast, and I would recommend that. I really liked it. Now here's something we've all seen, tobacco country. I have written on my wall somewhere up here, you write to fight what must not stand, or you write to preserve what you fear will be swept away. This is either or both of that. I can't tell, but I never want to forget in my life what it's like to be in a tobacco field like this, which is of course as much, you see it as much as we do in North Carolina. It's an astonishing. And is that a coastal plain sky or what? Y'all people have some sky parties when you are down there. It's incredible. You don't know what you're going to find in a porch in Carolinas, right? So I took pictures of it so that we could see it. The title of my book comes from Lawson describing his country describing what he sees as a delicious country. And I cannot dispute that. That is delicious. It's incredible. He says, this day we passed through a delicious country, none that I ever saw exceeds it. I'm not sure I can dispute that. But just taking pictures, that's not much. So I had to do something more. So one of the things I noticed, and you could not fail to notice it, is that we too, I said that Lawson was walking through a moment where he was walking through a knife edge. 50 years before Lawson, the Native Americans were probably living much like they had lived 1,000 years before. 50 years after Lawson, you are in full on, knee breeches and perukes, colonial United States. It was nothing like that. Lawson understood that he was walking through a moment where everything was balanced on a knife edge, and the Indians were gone, and he was seeing the remnants of Indian culture, and what was coming he couldn't guess. He talks about a place that he called Avondale, which of course we know as Albandale. We came to a deserted Indian residence called Avondale, where we rested that night. He talks about empty dwelling places, and that is something I could relate to. Because as I walked through down the 2 lanes of South and North Carolina, all I saw was abandonment. All I saw was abandonment, and it never stopped. This was the most powerful and repeating theme of my journey, was abandoned places. Places that were just collapsing back into the earth. I usually read at this time when I'm with people together. I'm not going to read to you now. That would just be too freaky to sit here and read to you. But I went to this house that you can see there, was one of the most heartbreaking places that I've ever been in my life, because it really looked like the people just, sometimes you would, of course, I explored these abandoned houses. Some of them, it looked like that if you would open up their cupboards, there would be neatly stacked dishes, that they had just went out one day and never come home. And you look at a place like this where you can feel that a family lived there once, that this was a house, this was a home that was beautiful and filled with life and farming and family. And now it is just rotting from the inside out. It was just heartbreaking to think about that. And this last one, if you look closely, right sort of in the middle of that picture, you can see a green and a red and a pink dress hanging there. When I walked by this beautiful little empty row of stores with, I'm sure, a bunch of empty apartments up on top of them, these nice dresses, and you just couldn't fail to think that at one point this had been a secondhand store and some family was just trying so desperately to squeeze a few extra dollars out of their possessions and was selling, grandma's old dresses or something. And you just felt the loss of what has been. And because think about it, 50 years ago, we were still in post-war prosperity. Everybody at least had a sense, the world made sense to us. Does anybody here want to predict 50 years from now? Does anybody want to predict 5 months from now? Everything is changing. We are at a pivot point in the world. Climatically, locally, governmentally, everything is changing. And we are at a vital time, and we don't know what's happening. So I felt that what I was doing was so important to document this moment. So, okay, this comparison business turns out to be a worthy enterprise. Whew, good for me, I have a book to write, and somebody gave me some money to do that. So I have a story to tell. How am I going to tell that story? Same way Lawson did. We're going to use multimedia. Did you know that Lawson has a page of art in his book? We're going to call these animals, and then we're all going to agree that these were animals drawn by a person who had never seen those animals. That thing in the middle that looks like one of the rodents of unusual size from The Princess Bride, that's meant to be a possum. Up here you have a a snake and a squirrel cuddling, because who hasn't seen that happen? And here's like a bear with giant swim paws or something. And then the bottom you see the a raccoon who Lawson tells us very confidently is using his tail to fish for crabs. He sticks his tail in the water and the crab grabs the tail, and the raccoon flings the crab out and then has his dinner. And of course, that's complete foofara. That's complete nonsense. And you could see like the Indians going like, tell him the raccoon story. He'll buy anything. And Lawson did, but it turns out I did some research that crab grabbing an animal's tail story is worldwide. Wherever they have crabs, they have a story that has to do with the crab grabbing an animal's tail, whether the animal's fishing for the crab or that's why the bear has a short tail because the crab bit it off. It grows naturally like the dandelion. It's like David and Goliath, which is Jack and the Beanstalk, which is Odysseus and the Cyclops, right? It's just, that's a story of humankind isn't much for teeth or claws, and the universe is a pretty scary place. So I guess being clever is really important. That's what we tell ourselves. And we can't figure out how animals work, so we make things up and tell them, and we tell ourselves the same story all the time. But it's wonderful that Lawson shares this story. So, okay, how am I going to tell the story? I'm going to use multimedia just like we do. I have a blog. I am telling the story in blog posts. I'm telling the story in Instagram, sharing stories. I'm live tweeting this. And the amazing thing is when you share these things, you know, Lawson wrote a book, you know, took a journey, and then 9 years later, a book came out, which was about the speed of communications then. I was updating my Instagram feed from my kayak. I was writing blog posts at picnic benches at campsites using my phone as a, you know, as a hotspot so that I could upload things. It was crazy pants. And sometimes, let's see. Oh, okay. I use Google Maps. Google Maps tells you can go closer and closer. You can tell them step by step where you went. So if you go to my website, LawsonTrek.com, Lawson Trek like Star Trek, you can follow every step of my journey. And, you know, Google being Google, some of the pictures vanish periodically and some of it reverts, but you'll see a lot of stuff. There's tons and tons of blog posts about that. And sometimes to do my blog posts, I would write a blog post in my journal, and then instead of then typing it onto the blog, I would just take pictures of it. You know, I was like, I'm tired. Here's a picture, read it. And you know what? People loved that. They loved that. They felt that that was really intimate. And so I was just sharing pictures. Now this picture down in the lower right is I was telling you about the Huguenots. These are direct descendants of Huguenots. This is the family Gary and Douglas Gary and his mom, Jean Gary. He's in the Huguenot Society. Jean couldn't get in because she could only trace her family to 1720. So she's an interloper. But Douglas can trace through his father back to like 1670 or 1690 or something like that. But they called me up. They left a message on the website and said, if you haven't left yet, would you be interested in seeing like the original Jamestown where the Huguenots had their church? I was like, well, yeah, I think I might. That sounds great. And as in the event, he couldn't take me there because the people it's landlocked and the river was high, so we couldn't go there by river. And to get there, we would have had to cross someone's land, and they weren't letting us do it. Spoiler alert, that means they had a still on their land that they didn't want me to see because they thought I would tell someone. But so here's me having pound cake with Huguenot descendants. Douglas Gary told me that he was born and now lives within 2 miles of where his great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather was born. My grandfather was born in the shtetl in Poland, and I have lived on 2 continents in 10 states and traveled all over this world. how different are our lives? It's astonishing. And again, that's why I was out there. That was my goal for being out there. Now, and here's something even more important. This is Peggy Scott, who is the vice chief of the Santee tribe, which is probably familiar to you guys. You know about the Santee. I reached out to her because I knew I was going to go through her territory, and I wanted to see if she would have, I reached out to the tribe, and they said, Peggy is the person you want to talk to. And I started explaining to Peggy, well, here's what I'm going to do. And I'm following the trip of this fellow named Lawson. And she said, oh, I know who Lawson is. She said, Lawson gave me my history back. And I said, okay, talk to me. And she said that she came up in a little school where she was the third group in, of course, racially bifurcated culture, where there was a drinking fountain for the white children, and for the black children, they had a crappy drinking fountain. And if you were a Native American child, the principal had to come and bring you a cup of water because there was no drinking fountain. How much more erased could you be? Naturally, she did not finish school, but eventually came back to it, went off to college and took a history class where she read Lawson. And here's Lawson telling stories about the Santee with obvious love, with obvious respect. She says, I never don't know where my copy of Lawson is. Lawson gave me my history back. That's why it was such a privilege to do this trip. I talked to Lawson. I talked to Peggy Scott of the Santee tribe. The whole Confederate flag thing was going on. This was 2015 when I was walking through here. Dylan Roof had committed those heinous crimes. So we were talking about the Confederate flag again. So I talked to people about that. It was an astonishing thing. I want to stop talking. I'm going to race through. I talked to people from the Catawba tribe. I talked to the oldest continually owned store in South Carolina. I learned how to survey like Lawson would have surveyed. He was a surveyor. I went and saw it just, Lawson describes the sitting and having lunch on this enormous rock. Right at that enormous rock, now it's a quarry. It's amazing to know that I walked right through where Lawson was. And again, I'm sharing all this stuff, and I want to quickly share. Here's a picture that I took of Mill Creek County Park. You guys are probably familiar with that, which I thought was very beautiful. And then I came to learn, of course, it was the separate but equal equivalent to the, beautiful state park right up north. And so it went with Poinsett. And I just took this picture and I liked it. And I don't know if you remember when Google was for a while auto-enhancing photos if you were storing them on Google. I went to that one day and I saw this. And I was like, what? That's not a picture I took. Well, as it turns out, yes, it is. Here's the picture I took. And then Google gets their hands on it and suddenly I'm Ansel Adams. So, I don't really know what to say about that except that I'm a better photographer than I knew. And so Lawson took a walk and he wrote a book and it came out 10 years later. I stumbled onto Lawson in about 1710 in 2010. My book came out in 2019. So, maybe things haven't changed all that much. There's my websites. And now I would like to talk to you guys. So if you have questions, ask away.
Oh my gosh, thank you, Scott. That was fabulous. Everybody, you can put your questions in the chat, or if you want to unmute and ask a question, you can. We do have one question in the chat from Star Hazard. He said, did you meet any Tuscarora descendants?
Yes, I did, in fact. There was they have John Lawson Legacy Days in Grifton, which is probably very near where Lawson was killed every year. And I met Tuscarora descendants. The Tuscarora eventually made their way up to New York because the Tuscaroras started in 1711 when they had about had it with people like Lawson telling them, maybe just another little strip of land, maybe just another little strip of land. No, it's going to be fine. Maybe just, and they wanted to move up and join their brethren in Pennsylvania. So they went up, and there's a heartbreaking note written by the Tuscaroras saying, you know, we want to be able to live. We want our children to be able to play in the brush without having to worry that they're going to be grabbed up every second. We want our women to be able to cook without having to worry that they're going to be raped or taken slaves. It's this heartbreaking thing. And the people in Pennsylvania said, yeah, okay, you guys are okay. All we need is a sort of note of good conduct from North Carolina. Well, North Carolina was not willing to do that. So here's the Tuscarora. They're like, we can stay here and be murdered and enslaved, and we can't leave. So option 3 is we're going to start a war. So they started the Tuscarora War in 1711, and that's when Lawson and von Graffenried were looking for another route up to Virginia, and they found the Tuscarora War Party, and it didn't work out too well for Lawson. In any case, one year at Lawson Legacy Days, some members of the Tuscarora came down, and they sort of laid a wreath at where they thought the Tuscarora had grabbed up Lawson, and they basically, some of the locals and some of the Tuscaroras said, we have a shared history, let's be friends. And it was kind of a sweet moment that I enjoyed seeing. So yes, I did.
That was great. I actually didn't even know about that tribe. I'm gonna have to look it up. Another question from Star. He's wondering, what was your best meal on the trip?
My best meal was, I'd have to go through the book to remember the name of the place, but it was a fried bologna sandwich for which one would gladly die. And probably from which one, because it's probably all fat, but I personally love a fried bologna sandwich. And when you go somewhere and they give you a slice of bologna that's the thickness of a hockey puck and the size of a dinner plate, slapped between 2 pieces of a barbecue bun with a couple pieces of, you know, individually wrapped cheese slices on it. I'm not sure life gets better than that, with some mustard and some mayonnaise on it. Oh, Lord have mercy. That was as good as my eating got.
That was not an answer I was expecting, but that's great. Okay, so Elizabeth Anderegg asks, when are we going to paddle again?
Soon. Elizabeth was my guide on, I think, my second day, and we had just such a wonderful time. You guys know Elizabeth, she's in your group. She's a truly wonderful person and was kind to me and thoughtful and taught me about birds. And I quoted her at one point when she was talking about the sounds that Elizabeth was talking about the jingle shells on the beach, those little shells that the oyster sort of fragments, I think, that you can hear. And she could tell the difference between when the tide was coming in and when the tide was going out. I learned so much from Elizabeth and had such a great time. I would love to paddle again with you and with Kathy too, and with Ed and with Eddie and with anybody. I would love to come down there. If you guys want to set up a paddle, I would so gladly come down and paddle with you guys. So,
I'm thinking a Sierra Club outing when this is all over.
When that's open, please do it. I would love to come down.
We would love to have you. That would be really fun. And we have paddled with Elizabeth, and she's great. Christine asks, did you see all the animals in the book?
No, because when Lawson was walking through, it was mostly settled by Indians or not settled. When I was walking through, it was mostly suburban or farmland or pine plantations. And I'm all for pine plantations because it's a way to get forest land on land that had been developed. But a pine plantation is monoculture no matter how you look at it. And I felt like walking through, walking down these 2 lanes, you wouldn't see a squirrel. You wouldn't see a deer. You know, we saw a lot of soaring birds. We saw hawks and vultures and stuff like that. We saw a lot of birds, and you know, plenty of deer and squirrels and the occasional raccoon, but and the occasional snake and stuff. But really, of course, we saw much less wildlife, and heartbreakingly, we saw so few insects. I just cannot tell you how true what people tell you about this sort of diminution of insects where people live are. They're just gone. It was really amazing how little I saw of the insectivora.
We have a comment from David McLean. David, why don't you unmute yourself and you can read your comment or say it directly.
Oh, I just wrote it down. Scott, I met you on Bulls Island.
Oh yeah. Hi, David.
The night that you had that huge thunderstorm, camping out very, very early, the first day or two of your trip.
Right. It was, I think, the third day.
Yeah. Good to see you again. I've enjoyed your blog immensely.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah. I stayed on, Capers Island? Is that
Capers
right?
Island.
Capers Island. And needed to see Bulls Island, obviously, so I paddled across. Oh my God, you've got your patch. See, we have, because, you know, I was like Lawson, right? So I had to have gifts to give to the natives. So I made patches and I made pins. And you can go to my website and buy them now. And we have a poster too, but of course the book is the best thing. But at any rate, I stayed on Capers and there was an enormous, like, you know, tropical storm that blew through. It was fabulous. You know, I Instagrammed video of the tent sort of breathing in and out like a bellows. Everything was fine. I was fine. And I learned how powerful was the current in those, you know, those inlets, because I paddled across just from Capers to Bulls, which you guys know is so close. And when the tide was coming out, I had to basically aim directly inland and paddle for all I was worth for about 10 minutes. And then I would land back on Capers Island a little bit further out than where I had started. And I was paddling in the whole time. That's how powerful that current is. But I met David and what's his name? Christensen?
Will Christensen. That's an excellent memory. Yes.
Right. And I had just brought myself, you know, a canteen full of water, and I'd walk the length of Bulls Island and then all the way back on the beach. And so by the end of that day, I was sweating and I had drunk up all my water. And I found these guys, they were taking pictures. And I said, would you happen to have some extra water? And of course, they shared a canteen full of water with me, which is exactly the whole experience. Lawson just showed up everywhere. He was like, hi, Lawson here. I'm hungry and I need a place to sleep. Anybody got anything? And they were like, yeah, here's some food for you. Here's a place to sleep. Do you want to sleep with one of our trading girls? And Lawson tells us that he did not. Hard to know. He says he didn't. In any case, that kind of hospitality, as I said, I got pound cake from Huguenots, and I got love and affection from my guides, and water from people I stumbled into, and it was just constant people telling me things and showing me, sharing history and telling me stories.
That is fabulous. Elizabeth, do you want to unmute and tell us about your experience with Scott, which legs of the trip you went on, et cetera?
Yes, we did the second leg. Ed Deal paddled with him across the harbor from Charleston to the East Cooper area. And I picked him up the next morning. I guess didn't you camp over on Goat Island?
I did. I camped at Goat Island. Now, Elizabeth, I think it's worth pointing out that when Ed picked me up, it was in Charleston, and we were going to have to paddle across the harbor. And Ed was very, very skeptical about what he had gotten himself into by agreeing to guide me. But he calmed down when he saw that I could handle a canoe and a kayak paddle. Did you worry about me, Elizabeth?
Not so much on the intercoastal, other than the boat wakes, because you were so loaded. If you remember, when we pulled into Buck Hall, we pulled into Buck Hall, didn't we break the kayak cart with your canoe. I think we did. You know, the little wheelie
Yeah,
cart
that's right. That cart that Kathy brought and
to drag it up to the campsite to relieve some of the pain of carrying that loaded canoe. If I remember correctly, it broke the wheelies. And it was quite a loaded canoe. And the only thing I was really concerned about was if a boat wake swamped you, that it would be difficult to recover from that kind of an incident. And so, you know, the Intercoastal is notorious for quick moving, larger boats, larger yachts.
Ed had said that the first day. Once he saw that I could handle the canoe, he was like, if you see somebody coming fast, which they will, and you're not sure they see you, which they won't, paddle into the grass, because the grass will dampen the wake and that will keep you afloat. And many times I had to do that exact thing. And it was so Ed did a good job of getting me organized.
Yeah, it was a fun trip. And I remember the parting as I paddled towards Garris Landing and you turned to the right to Capers, and I said, just keep on going. You'll know when you get there, because you seemed a little hesitant. And Kathy had said, you know, you just get him over to the inlet and point him in the right direction and he should be fine. And if you recall, that was how we parted.
That's exactly right. And you picked up exactly. I was very uncertain because though I can handle a kayak, I was then consciously paddling a canoe out an inlet towards the open ocean. And I mean, Kathy, who had outfitted me, Kathy Livingston, who used to do Nature Adventure Outfitters, when I talked to Kathy, I was like, I want to rent a canoe from you. And she was like, well, what is it that you want to do? And I told her what I wanted to do. There was like a moment of radio silence and she said, okay, I got this. And she not only gave me the canoe rent-free, she put a satellite phone in there, she put a flare gun in there, she put a week's worth of water in there, she put, you know, she organized a place for me to stay every week. She said, what you're doing is worth doing and I want to support this. She paid Elizabeth to guide me. I mean, it was amazing. And that's the kind of support that I got this whole way through. But at any rate, I was comfortable, but I was paddling out and a little bit terrified. And everybody said, you can't miss it. You'll see it. You'll see where the campsite is. And when I saw that campsite and pulled up that canoe on dry land, and I was like, that's Bull's Island. I'm on Capers Island. I'm where I'm supposed to be. I made it. I thought I had climbed Mount Everest. I was so, if you go back early enough in my Instagram feed, you can see these delirious images shared from Capers Island.
Well, you'd done it on your own, basically. That was your first solitary moment, I guess, on the trip, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. You're exactly right. And I didn't even realize that first week was going to be by far the most logistically difficult, the most physically difficult, the most complicated week of the entire enterprise. I really didn't understand that because I'm stupid, because like Lawson, I just showed up somewhere and said, think I'll just take me a walk, and then set out and then trusted to the universe and the locals to take care of me. And like Lawson, I was very fortunate and the universe and the locals did a real good job.
Well, we all love Kathy Livingston too. She's fabulous. We have a question from Julia that says, what area did you find the most unchanged from Lawson's time?
By far, the South Carolina coast. There were places where I paddled into some of those tidal creeks. Elizabeth, I think you were there the day we went to this shell ring, weren't you?
Yeah, to the shell ring.
Right. When I paddled in there, I was with Eddie Stroman that day, and I realized that I'm on the water. To the left of me is, you know, is marsh grass. To the right of me is marsh grass. Above me is sky, and behind me is ocean, and that's all I can see. And I was like, if Lawson looked around, this is exactly what he would have seen. It's just no different. Tidal Creek, you know, Spartina, and sky. And that was kind of chilling and thrilling, beautiful moment. I had similar moments, you know, in the swamps right there. Those, you know, people haven't developed the swamps. And so it was very Lawsonian, probably still was still very, very much unchanged. And that's probably it though. There's, you know, in Poinsett, there's, you can see what Lawson calls the most, I think, most remarkable prospect he's seen, or the greatest prospect, I forget his actual words, that he's seen since he got there. You know, he's 300 feet up, so he thinks he's in the mountains. But you can see that same view from the little gazebo at the top of the hill in Poinsett State Park. And it was always fun to know I'm exactly where Lawson stood. But, you know, only in the swamp and in the Spartina did I feel like I'm seeing what Lawson saw.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, Scott. This has been absolutely fascinating. And I'm going to unmute everybody so we can, well, I thought I was, but I don't see an unmute
Let
button.
me quickly say, if you have questions, please feel free. If you go to lawsontrek.com or to my personal website, scotthuler.com, both of them have email links that if you just click, that gives you an email that lands directly in my pocket or on my desk. Please feel free if you have questions or you have thoughts. I'm glad to talk to anybody. I care about Lawson a whole stupid lot, and I'm glad to talk about it. So please feel free to reach out. I've really enjoyed talking with you guys, and I'm glad to continue the conversation.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. And thanks to everyone for coming. And
Scott.
please get a
My
copy of the book.
All right,
All right.
Scott, I expect to hear from you.
Okay, Elizabeth, you will.
We'll plan that road trip, the field trip.
Please
All
do.
right.
That
Good
Good
sounds-
night, everybody. Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you, Laura.
Bye.
All right, thank you.
There we go.